Why did the smartest girl in school actually come back completely broken? I was a junior when Sophia returned to school after being gone for an entire year. She used to be the type who knew everyone's name, organized every school event, and had this energy that made people want to be around her. But the girl who walked through those doors that September morning? She wasn't the same person. There's the girl who tried to off herself. Someone whispered loud enough for the whole class to hear. Kids started pulling out their phones, probably checking old posts about what happened. I heard she was in a psych ward, another voice said. My cousin said she went completely crazy and they had to lock her up. Sophia kept her head down like she couldn't hear them, but I saw her hands shaking as she gripped her backpack straps. That day she sat alone in the cafeteria while people stared and whispered. I wasn't sure what was true and what wasn't, but something about her felt broken. I watched Sophia for the next few weeks, and honestly, it was hard to watch. She dropped every single extracurricular she used to run. The girl who used to have her hand up first in every class now barely made eye contact with teachers. She'd leave school the second the bell rang, like she couldn't get out fast enough. But here's what nobody else seemed to notice. Sophia was still kind. I'd see her in the bathroom helping freshman girls who were crying about friend drama. She left anonymous encouraging notes in people's lockers when they were having bad days. Once, I watched her give her jacket to a homeless guy outside the convenience store, even though she was shivering the whole walk back. Nobody ever acknowledged her for it. They just used her and went back to treating her like she was invisible. Everything changed the day I got caught skipping third period. I was walking through an empty hallway when Principal Lowbray appeared around the corner. His face lit up with that fake concern adults always have when they catch you doing something wrong. Shouldn't you be in class? He asked, already pulling out his phone. I'm calling your parents. Detention. Today. After school. Before I could even respond, Sophia's voice cut through the hallway. Actually, I asked her to help me get something from my locker. It's my fault. Principal Lowbray's entire demeanor shifted the second he saw her. His friendly expression disappeared, replaced by something cold, something threatening. Sophia, he said slowly, you really shouldn't be making up stories. You know how important it is for you to stay honest, especially given your history. He stepped closer to her. I'm keeping an eye on you. Very close eye. Sophia's face went pale, but she held his stare. I'm not making anything up. We'll see about that. He looked back at me. Get to class. Both of you. The second he walked away, I turned to thank Sophia, but she was already shaking. Her hands were trembling so badly she had to shove them in her pockets. You didn't have to do that, I said. Just, be more careful, she whispered, then walked away before I could say anything else. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Principal Lowbray had looked at her, like he was threatening her, like he had power over her, and more importantly, why Sophia had helped me even though she was clearly terrified of him. A few days later, I was walking past the main office when I heard yelling. Through the window, I could see Sophia standing in Principal Lowbray's office. His face was bright red. He was pointing at her aggressively, slamming his hand on his desk. I couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, but I could see Sophia's face crumbling. When she came rushing out, she looked like she was dying, hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face. She could barely walk straight. I went after her and found her collapsed in the bathroom stall, gasping for air. Hey, breathe, I said, sitting down next to her. What happened? She was shaking so hard I thought she might pass out. I can't do this anymore. I can't. Seeing him every single day is killing me. What did he do to you? He threatened to send me away again. Permanently this time. I grabbed her hand. Sophia, you need to tell me what's going on. I can help. Please. She looked at me with these devastated eyes, and for the first time since she'd been back, she actually looked like she wanted to tell someone. Like she couldn't keep carrying this alone. You deserve to know the truth, she whispered. Last year I stayed late working on the yearbook. I was walking past Principal Lowbray's office and I heard him on the phone. He was talking about laundering money. Millions of dollars from the school. Fake accounts, wire transfers, how to cover it all up. Everything. My blood ran cold. He opened the door and saw me standing there. He knew I heard everything. Her voice cracked. He threatened to ruin my life. Said he'd get my parents deported if I ever told anyone. He has connections, documentation on my family, everything. Sophia, I couldn't handle keeping the secret. It destroyed me. I tried to hurt myself because I couldn't tell anyone what I knew. My parents sent me away for a year. And now that I'm back, he's threatening me again to make sure I stay quiet. She pressed her face into my shoulder and sobbed. That was the principal everyone trusted, and he'd broken her completely. I wrapped my arms around Sophia and felt her whole body shaking against mine. Her tears soaked through my shirt while I kept one hand on her back and whispered that she didn't have to carry this alone anymore. She gasped for air between sobs, and I counted her breaths with her until they started coming slower and more regular. The bathroom floor was cold and hard, but we stayed there for maybe 20 minutes until her hands stopped trembling quite so badly. I grabbed paper towels from the dispenser and wet them under the sink, then helped her wipe the mascara streaks off her face. Her eyes were red and swollen, but at least she could breathe normally again. I checked the hallway to make sure it was empty before we left, then walked her to her next class even though it made me late to mine. She squeezed my hand once before going through the classroom door, and I saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Hope, maybe, or just relief that someone finally knew. That night, I lay in bed staring at my ceiling and couldn't stop replaying everything Sophia had told me. Millions of dollars, money laundering, fake accounts and wire transfers, threats to deport her parents. I kept seeing the way Principal Lobray had looked at her in the hallway, that cold, threatening expression that everyone else missed. Around 11, I grabbed my phone and texted my sister Charlotte, who was studying criminal justice at the state university. I typed out that I needed to talk about something really serious and could she call me. My phone rang within 10 minutes and Charlotte's voice came through sounding worried. She asked what was wrong and I could tell from her tone that she knew this wasn't normal drama. I told her everything Sophia had revealed starting from the beginning. Charlotte stayed completely quiet while I explained about Sophia overhearing Lobray on the phone discussing money laundering, about him catching her, and threatening her family with deportation, about how the secret had destroyed her so badly she tried to hurt herself, and got sent away for a year. I described how Lobray was still threatening Sophia now that she was back, how he had all this power and connections and documentation on her family. When I finished talking, there was silence for a few seconds before Charlotte started asking specific questions about dates and details. She explained that this was way bigger than school drama and involved serious federal crimes. Embezzlement, she said. Witness intimidation. Threatening someone's immigration status to keep them quiet. Charlotte's voice got really serious when she told me we needed to be extremely careful because Lobray clearly had resources and connections, but she would help me figure out how to approach this safely. She made me promise not to do anything without talking to her first. The next day at the school, I couldn't stop watching Lobray with this new understanding of what he really was. He stood in the main hallway during passing periods smiling at students and asking about their classes. He shook hands with Mr. Peterson, the math teacher, and laughed at something another teacher said. He walked around acting like he cared so much about our education and our futures, while he was stealing millions of dollars that should have gone to books and programs and teacher salaries. I watched him ruffle some freshman kid's hair in this friendly way, and felt sick. Sophia walked past me between third and fourth period and caught me staring at Lobray. She gave me this tiny nod that nobody else would have noticed. Her eyes looked less hollow than they had yesterday, and I realized she was relieved that someone finally knew her truth and believed her. Charlotte drove down that weekend with her laptop and a thick notebook covered in sticky notes. She spread everything out on my bedroom floor, and we sat there for hours while she explained how embezzlement investigations actually work. She showed me articles about other cases where school administrators had stolen money and how they got caught. Charlotte emphasized over and over that we needed documentation and paper trails, not just Sophia's testimony about what she overheard. She explained that Lobray would definitely try to discredit Sophia by bringing up her mental health history and her hospitalization. His lawyers would say she was unstable and making things up. We needed hard evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Bank records, financial statements, emails, anything that proved money was moved illegally. Charlotte made me write down a list of what kind of evidence would actually matter to authorities and what we should try to find. Sophia and I started meeting secretly in the library during lunch period. We picked a table in the back corner behind the reference section where nobody ever went. We told anyone who asked that we were working on a group project for history class. Sophia brought a notebook, and we began writing down everything she could remember from that night she overheard Lobray on the phone. I asked her specific questions about phrases he used, any numbers she caught glimpses of, names of banks he mentioned. Her hands shook while she wrote, but she pushed through it. She remembered him saying something about wire transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. She'd seen papers on his desk with company names she didn't recognize. She wrote down every detail she could recall, even though some of it was fuzzy after a year. I watched her face get pale and her breathing get faster, but she was determined to get it all recorded. This was the first time she'd been able to tell anyone these details, and actually have them documented somewhere. I spent hours that weekend researching public school financial records online. I discovered that certain budget documents are legally required to be available to community members under public records laws. School districts have to publish annual financial statements, vendor contracts, and audit reports. I found the form on our district's website for requesting these documents. Charlotte helped me draft a formal public records request that asked specifically for financial statements, vendor contracts, and audit reports from the past 5 years. We made sure to use the exact legal language required. Charlotte explained that submitting this request might alert someone that we were looking into the finances, but we needed to establish a legitimate paper trail. We needed to show later that we tried to get information through proper legal channels. I hit submit on the request form knowing there was no going back now. 2 weeks passed and I didn't receive any response to my records request. Charlotte said this was suspicious because school districts are legally required to respond within 10 business days, even if they need more time to gather the documents. Meanwhile, I started noticing Lobray watching me more closely in the hallways. On Tuesday, he was standing near my locker right when I came to get my books before lunch. On Thursday, he appeared in the hallway outside my English class, even though the principal's office was on the other side of the building. Sophia noticed it too and pulled me aside after school to warn me that he was probably trying to figure out if she had told me anything. She said he always did this before he made his threats more direct. He would watch people first to see who they talked to and where they went. I started keeping a detailed journal hidden in my closet at home behind my winter clothes. I wrote down dates and times of every weird interaction with Lobray. I documented when he appeared near my locker, what hallways he was in when he shouldn't be there, anything that seemed off. Charlotte had taught me that patterns of behavior could be evidence too. especially for showing intimidation tactics. I also began taking different routes through school and changing up my schedule so Lobre couldn't predict where I would be at any given time. Instead of always going to my locker between second and third period, I started going at random times. I varied which bathroom I used and which entrance I came in through each morning. It felt paranoid, but Charlotte said it was smart to make myself a harder target to monitor. Sophia had a breakthrough in therapy when Imogen Burnett asked if something at the school was making her anxiety worse. Sophia had been seeing Imogen since before she went away, and trusted her more than any other adult. Imogen noticed that Sophia's panic attacks were getting more frequent again, and gently asked what might be triggering them. Sophia carefully revealed that she was threatened by someone in authority at the school. She didn't name Lobre yet because she was still scared, but she explained that this person had power over her and was making threats about her family. Imogen immediately started documenting everything Sophia said about ongoing trauma and witness intimidation. She wrote it all down in Sophia's official therapy records with dates and specific details. And this created a professional record that might be useful later if we needed to prove what Lobre was doing. Sophia told me afterward that she felt validated for the first time because an adult actually believed something wrong was happening, instead of just telling her to focus on her recovery. 2 weeks after I submitted my public records request, a thin envelope showed up in my mailbox with the school district logo. My hands shook as I opened it, expecting financial documents and proof of what Lobre was doing. Instead, I found a single-page letter saying my request was too broad and burdensome to fulfill. They claimed they would need to review thousands of pages of documents and it would take too much staff time. I took a picture of the letter and sent it to Charlotte immediately. She called me back within 5 minutes and actually laughed when I read it to her. She explained this was a classic stalling move that institutions used when they wanted to hide something. The law required them to respond to public records requests, but they could claim requests were too vague or too big to slow things down. Charlotte helped me write a new request that was super specific. Instead of asking for all financial records, we asked for vendor contracts and payment records for 5 specific companies from the budget documents I had seen online. We also requested any emails between Lobre and these vendors from the past 3 years. This narrower request would be much harder for them to deny without looking obviously suspicious. We submitted it through the district website again, and Charlotte told me to document everything including the dates and their responses. The next Monday, the whole school gathered in the auditorium for a mandatory assembly about character and leadership. I sat in the middle section with my class while teachers lined the walls to make sure nobody left early. The lights dimmed and Principal Lobre walked onto the stage with this huge smile like he was about to give the most important speech of our lives. He started talking about integrity and making good choices, and how the decisions we make now would shape our entire futures. His voice was warm and inspiring, the kind that made you want to believe every word he said. I had to grip the edges of my seat to keep from standing up and screaming the truth about who he really was. 3 rows ahead of me, I could see Sophia's shoulders getting tighter and tighter as he kept talking. Her head was down and her hands were clenched in her lap. Lobre went on about honesty and trust, and being the kind of person others could count on. He told this story about a student who found a wallet full of cash and turned it in instead of keeping it, and everyone clapped like it was the most amazing thing they'd ever heard. When the assembly ended, I watched teachers go up to Lobre and shake his hand, telling him what a great leader he was, and how lucky the school was to have him. I realized in that moment how completely he had fooled everyone. They saw this caring principal who gave inspiring speeches, and they had no idea he was stealing millions of dollars and threatening students to keep them quiet. That weekend, I decided to dig deeper into the school's financial records. I remembered Charlotte mentioning that public schools had to post certain budget information online, so I spent Saturday morning going through the district website. Most of the site was easy to find, stuff like lunch menus and sports schedules and parent newsletters. But I kept clicking through different sections until I found this barely visible link at the bottom of the finance page that said archived documents. The archive section looked like nobody had updated it in years, and the files were organized in this confusing way that made everything hard to find. I downloaded budget spreadsheets from 3 years ago and opened them on my laptop. The numbers were overwhelming at first because I didn't really understand how school budgets worked. There were thousands of line items for everything from teacher salaries to paper towels to building maintenance. I spent hours going through each tab of the spreadsheet, looking for anything that seemed weird or out of place. By Sunday afternoon, my eyes were burning from staring at numbers, but I had found something interesting. Several vendor payments went to companies with really generic names like Summit Solutions and Apex Services and Cornerstone Consulting. These names didn't match any actual school services I knew about. We didn't have a consulting company helping us, and I had never heard of Summit or Apex doing anything at our school. I took screenshots of all these payments and sent them to Charlotte. She helped me look up these company names in business registries online. We searched state records and federal databases, and 2 of the companies didn't show up anywhere. They didn't exist as real registered businesses, which meant the payments were going to fake companies that someone had created just to steal money. On Monday during lunch, Sophia pulled me into an empty classroom and closed the door. She had been thinking about everything we were doing and remembered something that might help. She told me about Haley Freeman, a senior who graduated last year. During Haley's junior year, Lobre had called her into his office multiple times, and afterward Haley became really quiet and withdrawn. Sophia said Haley used to be outgoing and friendly, but something changed after those meetings with Lobre. She stopped participating in class and started leaving school quickly every day, just like Sophia did later. Sophia thought maybe Haley had seen or heard something suspicious too, and Lowbray had threatened her to keep quiet. We decided to try to find Haley and ask if she would talk to us. I searched for her on social media and found her Instagram account. She was attending community college now and worked at her parents' restaurant on weekends. I sent her a direct message saying I was a student at our school looking into some concerns about school administration and asking if she would be willing to talk. I tried to make the message sound casual and not too scary, but also clear enough that she would understand it was serious. I didn't mention Lowbray's name in the message because I was worried he might somehow see it. 3 days went by with no response from Haley, and I started thinking maybe she wouldn't answer or didn't want to get involved. Then on Thursday evening, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I answered and heard a girl's voice asking if this was the person who messaged her about the school. It was Haley and she sounded nervous. Her voice was shaking as she explained that she didn't want to text about this because she was scared of leaving any written record. She told me that during her junior year, she had been in Lowbray's office dropping off some forms for her guidance counselor. While she was there, she accidentally saw financial documents spread across his desk with company names and dollar amounts. Lowbray came back into the office and caught her looking at the papers. His whole face changed and he became really angry and threatening. He told her that if she ever mentioned what she saw to anyone, he would make sure the health department found serious violations at her parents' restaurant. He said he had connections everywhere and could shut down their business with one phone call. Haley was terrified because her family's restaurant was their only income, and her parents had worked for years to build it. She never told anyone what happened because she was scared Lowbray would destroy everything her family had. She said she still had nightmares about his threats even though she graduated and didn't have to see him anymore. I asked if I could record our conversation and she said yes. So I put my phone on speaker and used my laptop to record everything she was saying. Now we had proof that Lowbray had threatened multiple students, not just Sophia. This showed a clear pattern of using intimidation to cover up his crimes. The following week, I signed up for community service hours helping in the main office. The school secretary was always busy and seemed grateful for the help, so she let me file papers and organize documents without watching me too closely. While I was putting away vendor invoices in the filing cabinet, I noticed that certain invoices had a red stamp that said, "Principal approval only." These invoices didn't have the normal signatures from the business office or the district procurement department. I casually asked the secretary about this while we were sorting mail together. She explained that Lowbray handled some contracts directly with vendors he had special relationships with. She said it like it was a good thing, like he was getting the school better deals by working with vendors he knew personally. She didn't seem to think anything was wrong with it. I nodded and acted like I was just curious, but inside I was screaming because this was exactly how he was hiding the fake payments. By marking certain invoices as principal approval only, he made sure nobody else in the district office looked at them carefully or questioned where the money was going. Charlotte told me she had a contact who might be able to help us, a journalist named Aurelia Bishop, who covered education and government corruption for the regional newspaper. Charlotte reached out to Aurelia and explained that we had evidence of possible financial fraud at a local school. Aurelia agreed to meet with us at a coffee shop about 20 minutes from the school, far enough away that nobody would see us together. We met her on Saturday afternoon and she was younger than I expected, maybe in her late 20s with short dark hair and this serious expression that made me feel like she actually cared about what we were saying. I spread out all our evidence on the table between us. The fake vendor payments, the screenshots from the financial database, the recording of Haley's phone call, Sophia's journal documenting Lowbray's threats. Aurelia listened without interrupting and took notes in this small notebook she carried. She was particularly interested in the companies that didn't exist in any business registry. She explained that journalists had tools for investigating corporations that regular people didn't have access to. She could check property records, financial filings, and corporate connections that might reveal who actually owned these fake companies. She asked if I could get her copies of the financial documents I had found, and I sent them to her email address right there at the coffee shop. Before we left, she told us to be extremely careful because people who stole this much money were dangerous and would do anything to protect themselves. The next Tuesday, I got called to the principal's office over the intercom during third period. My stomach dropped and I felt like I might throw up as I walked down the hallway. When I entered Lowbray's office, he was sitting behind his desk with this cold expression that made my skin crawl. He didn't yell or seem angry. Instead, he asked me to sit down and started asking questions about my academic goals and college plans. His voice was calm and friendly, but there was something underneath it that felt like a threat. He mentioned that he had noticed me spending a lot of time with Sophia lately, and suggested that I should choose my friendships carefully. He said some students had instability issues that could be contagious, and being associated with the wrong people could damage my permanent record and hurt my chances of getting into good colleges. He never directly said anything threatening, but the message was completely clear. He was warning me to stay away from Sophia and stop whatever I was doing. He knew I was involved in something and he was trying to scare me into backing off. The whole conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. When he finally dismissed me, I walked out of his office trying to keep my face calm even though I was shaking inside. I went straight to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall, pulling out my phone with trembling hands. I texted Charlotte immediately and told her what happened, typing out every detail I could remember while it was still fresh in my mind. She responded within seconds telling me to write down every single word Lowbray said, His exact tone, his body language, everything. That night, I sat at my desk and filled 3 pages in my journal with every detail of the conversation. I wrote down how he leaned forward when he mentioned Sophia, how his voice got quieter when he talked about permanent records, how he smiled in this fake way that didn't reach his eyes. I couldn't stop thinking about how many other students he might have done this to over the years, how many families he had hurt, and how many kids he had scared into silence. All that money he stole was supposed to be for our education, for better books and computers and programs that would help us learn. Instead, he was using it to make himself rich while threatening anyone who got close to finding out. I felt angry in a way I had never felt before, this burning feeling in my chest that made me want to scream. But I also felt more determined than ever to make sure he didn't get away with it. 2 days later, Aurelia called me with news that made everything click into place. She had run background checks on the fake vendor companies using her journalist resources, and discovered something huge. All 3 companies were registered to the same address, and when she looked into that address, it turned out to be a mailbox rental service. Nobody actually worked at these companies because they didn't really exist. They were just names on paper that Lobray used to move money around. But Aurelia found something even more important. She traced the financial connections and discovered that these fake companies had ties to Roman Espinoza, a member of the school board. Espinoza was one of the people who voted on budget approvals and was supposed to be overseeing how the school spent money. Instead, he was apparently working with Lobray to steal it. This meant the corruption went way beyond just one principle. It involved people at the highest levels who were supposed to be protecting students and making sure the school ran properly. Aurelia said she was going to keep digging into Espinoza's finances and see what else she could find. She told me to keep documenting everything and to be even more careful now, because we were dealing with multiple powerful people who had a lot to lose if the truth came out. School became a completely different place after that conversation with Aurelia. I walked through the hallways looking at everything with new eyes, knowing that the corruption went way beyond just Lobray and involved people at the highest levels who were supposed to be protecting us. The next morning, I got to the school early because I wanted to talk to Mr. Tucker before classes started. I found him in his office organizing files, and when he saw my face, he immediately closed the door and sat down across from me. I told him about Aurelia's investigation and what she had discovered about the fake companies and Roman Espinoza's connections to all of it. Mr. Tucker listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before he started talking. He said he had noticed weird things about how certain school funds were handled for years now, things that never quite made sense when he looked at budget reports and vendor contracts. He told me about purchase orders that went through without normal approval processes, about companies that got paid huge amounts but never seemed to actually provide services, about financial records that disappeared or got changed without explanation. Mr. Tucker admitted he had kept these concerns to himself because he was scared of what would happen if he spoke up against the principal and school board members, scared of losing his job and his ability to help students. But knowing that students like Sophia and Haley were being threatened and hurt by this corruption made him realize that his silence had been wrong and that he needed to do something about it. He offered to help us put together all the evidence we had collected and said he knew other teachers who had noticed suspicious things over the years, but didn't know what to do about it or who to tell. He pulled out a folder from his desk drawer that contained copies of financial documents he had been quietly keeping for the past 3 years, things that showed patterns of money moving in ways that didn't match what the school was actually spending on programs and supplies. Having an adult on our side who understood the system and had access to official records felt like a huge turning point in our investigation. That same afternoon, I got home from the school and checked my email like I did every day, and sitting at the top of my inbox was a message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line just said financial documents, and my heart started racing before I even opened it. Inside the email, there was no message, no explanation of who sent it or why, just a bunch of attachments with names like vendor contracts and payment schedules and internal memos. I downloaded everything onto my laptop and started going through the files, and within minutes I realized these were internal school district financial documents that I definitely shouldn't have access to. There were emails between Lobray and the fake vendor companies discussing payment amounts and transfer dates, spreadsheets showing money moving between different accounts and invoices for services that clearly never happened. The email address that sent everything looked like it might belong to someone who worked in the district office based on the format, and I wondered if maybe someone there had seen Aurelia's article and wanted to help expose what was happening. I immediately called Charlotte and told her what I had received, and she drove over that night to help me go through everything and make sure the documents were real and not some kind of trap. We spent hours verifying dates and cross-referencing information with other evidence we had collected, and Charlotte used some of her criminal justice contacts to confirm that the document formats matched official school district records. By the time we finished, it was past midnight, but we had added dozens of new pieces of evidence to our file that showed exactly how Lobray had been moving money around and covering his tracks. The next week at the school, I started noticing that Lobray was acting different, more on edge and angry than I had ever seen him before. Teachers were whispering in the hallways about his mood swings and how he had been snapping at people over tiny things that normally wouldn't bother him. On Wednesday, I was walking past the main office when I heard him absolutely screaming at the school secretary about a scheduling mistake, his voice so loud that students in the hallway stopped to stare. The secretary came out of his office looking shaken and upset, and I heard her tell another teacher that she had never seen him lose control like that in all the years she had worked there. Lobray must have realized that the investigation was closing in on him, because his behavior got more desperate and threatening with each day that passed. Sophia texted me on Thursday afternoon saying that Lobray had cornered her in an empty hallway after school and gotten right in her face while he talked to her. She said he told her that if she had been spreading lies about him to anyone, her family would be on a plane back to their home country within a week, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. His threat was direct and specific in a way that terrified Sophia, but it also confirmed that we were getting close to exposing him, and that he was scared enough to make mistakes. And I wrote down everything Sophia told me about the encounter, including his exact words, and the time and location where it happened, adding it to the growing file of evidence that showed his pattern of intimidation. Charlotte had been working behind the scenes to set up a meeting with someone who could actually do something about all the evidence we had collected. She told me she had contacted an FBI agent named Leo Christensen, who worked in the Financial Crimes Division, and handled cases involving public corruption and embezzlement. Agent Christensen agreed to meet with us after Charlotte explained the basics of what we had discovered, and on a Saturday morning we drove downtown to a federal building that looked serious and official in a way that made my stomach hurt. We brought everything with us in 2 big folders, all the documents and recordings and photographs and journals that we had been collecting for the past 2 months. Agent Christensen met us in a conference room, and he was younger than I expected, maybe in his 30s, with a calm way of talking that made me feel like he actually cared about what we were telling him. We spent 3 hours going through all our evidence piece by piece while he asked detailed questions and took notes on his laptop. He seemed particularly interested in the financial documents showing the fake vendor companies and the payments that didn't match any actual services. And he asked Charlotte and me to explain how we had obtained each piece of evidence, so he could determine what would be usable in an investigation. When we finished presenting everything, Agent Christensen sat back in his chair and told us something that made all our hard work feel worth it. He said the FBI had actually been monitoring some suspicious financial activity in our school district for a few months, but they hadn't had enough concrete evidence to justify opening a full investigation until now. Our documentation and the internal records we had obtained gave them exactly what they needed to move forward with a formal case against Lobray and potentially other people involved in the corruption. Agent Christensen scheduled a separate interview with Sophia for the following week, and he said she needed to bring her parents and her therapist Imogen, so she would have support while talking about everything that happened. On the day of the interview, I went with Sophia to the federal building even though I couldn't be in the room with her, and I sat in the waiting area while she met with Agent Christensen for almost 2 hours. When she finally came out, she looked completely exhausted, but also somehow lighter, like telling the whole truth to someone with real authority had lifted some of the weight she had been carrying. Sophia told me later that Agent Christensen had asked her detailed questions about the night she overheard Lobray's phone call, and about every threat he had made against her and her family since then. He was especially interested in Lobray's threats about deportation, because he explained that using someone's immigration status to scare them into staying quiet is a federal crime that carries serious prison time on top of the financial crimes. Imogen provided documentation about the psychological damage that Lobray's threats had caused Sophia, including records from her hospitalization and her ongoing struggles with anxiety and trauma. Sophia's parents also gave statements about how Lobray had approached them at the school events and asked invasive questions about their immigration paperwork while pretending to be helpful. By the end of the interview, Agent Christensen had a complete picture of how Lobray had targeted and manipulated a vulnerable student to cover up his crimes. Everything happened incredibly fast after that. On a Tuesday morning, about 2 weeks after our meeting with Agent Christensen, Sophia texted me at 6 in the morning saying she was watching the news and the FBI was raiding the school district offices. I turned on my TV and saw live footage of federal agents going into the administration building with boxes and equipment, and my heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. My mom drove me to the school, and by the time we got there, the parking lot was full of police cars and unmarked vehicles with government plates. Students and teachers were standing around in groups watching everything happen, and nobody seemed to know exactly what was going on or why the FBI was there. I found Sophia near the front entrance, and we held on to each other while we watched federal agents walking in and out of the building carrying boxes of files and computers. Around 9 o'clock, we saw Lobray being escorted out of the main office by 2 agents, and he had handcuffs on his wrists, while they walked him to an unmarked car. The entire school went completely silent watching it happen, and I could see the shock on everyone's faces as they realized that our principal was arrested. Sophia grabbed my hand so tight it hurt, and we both had tears running down our faces, but they weren't sad tears anymore. The superintendent came out and made an announcement over a bullhorn that Principal Lobray had been placed on leave pending an investigation into financial problems at the school, and that classes were canceled for the day so everyone should go home. Students started pulling out their phones and texting and posting about what they had just seen, and within an hour the story was spreading all over social media. The next few days were complete chaos as news reporters showed up at the school and started doing stories about the arrest and the investigation. Aurelia published a long, detailed article explaining everything about the fake vendor companies and the millions of dollars that had been stolen, and the threats against students who knew too much. The story went viral locally, and then started getting picked up by bigger news outlets, and suddenly our school was all over the news for terrible reasons. Students and parents were shocked when they learned that over 5 years Lobray had stolen money that was supposed to be used for better books and computers and programs that would help us learn. People were especially upset when they found out that multiple students had been threatened to keep them quiet about what they knew. Some students and parents were really supportive of Sophia and me for coming forward and doing the right thing, even though it was scary and dangerous. But other people blamed us for bringing negative attention to the school and making everyone look bad, and I heard kids saying that we should have kept our mouths shut and not gotten involved. That hurt more than I expected because we had risked so much to expose the truth and protect other students from being hurt, and some people still saw us as the problem, instead of seeing Lobray as the criminal he was. Agent Christensen kept us informed about how the investigation was going, and every update made it clear that the evidence against Lobray was even worse than we had originally thought. The forensic accountants working on the case had traced over $4 million that Lobray had diverted through the fake companies over 5 years, and they discovered he was also taking kickbacks from actual vendors who wanted contracts with the school. They found proof of his financial partnership with Roman Espinoza, showing how the school board member had helped approve budgets and contracts that made the theft possible. The FBI also found documentation showing that Lobray had threatened at least 3 other students besides Sophia and Haley over the years, students who had seen or heard something suspicious, and who he had scared into silence with threats against their families or their futures. This pattern of witness intimidation proved that targeting Sophia wasn't just a one-time thing, but was actually how Lobray operated whenever someone got too close to discovering his crimes. Agent Christensen told us that the charges were going to be extensive, and that Lobray was looking at potentially decades in federal prison if he was convicted on everything. Sophia and I had to go back to the federal building several more times to give formal statements that would be used in the case against Lobray. A prosecutor interviewed us separately and asked us to describe everything we had experienced and witnessed in as much detail as possible, and having to relive all of it was harder than I expected. But there was also something powerful about finally being able to tell the complete truth in an official setting where it actually mattered and would be used to hold Lobray accountable for what he did. Imogen came with Sophia and provided detailed documentation about the psychological harm that Lobray's threats had caused, including medical records from Sophia's hospitalization and therapy notes showing her ongoing trauma and anxiety. Mr. Tucker and several other teachers also gave statements to investigators about suspicious activities they had witnessed over the years, but had been too afraid to report to anyone. The guidance counselor talked about times when Lobray had pressured him to change student records or stay quiet about concerning situations, and he admitted he regretted not speaking up sooner, even though he understood why he had been scared. The school board held an emergency meeting that was packed with parents and community members who wanted answers about how this corruption had gone undetected for so long. The meeting lasted for hours and got heated at times as people demanded to know why nobody had caught what Lobray was doing and why the normal oversight systems had failed so completely. At the end of the meeting, the board voted to fire Lobray immediately even before the criminal trial happened, based on the overwhelming evidence of serious misconduct and the fact that he had been arrested by federal agents. They also announced they were starting an internal investigation to figure out how the financial theft had continued for 5 years, without anyone noticing the fake companies and suspicious payments. The board promised to look into why Roman Espinoza's obvious conflicts of interest hadn't been caught, and why he had been allowed to vote on budgets and contracts that directly benefited him financially. The superintendent gave a public apology to Sophia and the other students who had been threatened, and said the district took full responsibility for failing to protect them from an administrator who abused his power. The apology felt hollow and inadequate given everything we had been through, and how long the adults in charge had failed to notice what was happening right under their noses, but at least it was something. A few weeks later, Agent Christensen called us in for an update and explained that Lobray's lawyer was trying to negotiate a plea deal to avoid trial. The lawyer wanted reduced charges in exchange for cooperation, but the prosecutor shut that down immediately because of how much money Lobray stole and how he threatened multiple students to keep them quiet. Agent Christensen told us the evidence was so strong that they felt confident about winning at trial without needing any deals, which made me feel relieved that Lobray wouldn't get off easy. The best news came when Sophia's family received official documentation from immigration authorities stating they were never in any danger of deportation, and that Lobray's threats were completely made up to control Sophia. Her mom cried when she read the letter, and Sophia just kept staring at the paper like she couldn't believe it was real, and I watched years of fear start lifting from her shoulders. Sophia started going to intensive therapy sessions with Imogen 3 times a week to work through everything that happened, and over the next few months I could see her gradually becoming more like her old self. She still carried the trauma and probably always would, but she wasn't crushed under the weight of a secret anymore, and that made all the difference. She started smiling more in the hallways, raising her hand in class again, and even cautiously reconnecting with old friends who finally understood why she had changed so much after what Lobray did to her. Her parents were incredibly grateful to me for believing Sophia and helping her, and they kept insisting I come over for dinner and treating me like I was their second daughter, which honestly made me feel good because my own parents were still processing everything. The school district held another meeting to announce new financial oversight procedures, including independent audits by outside firms, transparent budget reporting that anyone could access online, and a confidential system for students and staff to report concerns without fear of someone retaliating against them. They also promised training for everyone on recognizing and reporting abuse of authority, which seemed like basic stuff they should have had all along. These changes wouldn't undo the harm Lowbray caused or give Sophia back the year she lost, but they might prevent future corruption and protect other students from similar threats. So I guess that counted for something. Charlotte came home for spring break and told me she was inspired by how I handled the investigation and wanted to specialize in prosecuting public corruption when she became a lawyer. She said watching me refuse to be scared and methodically build a case despite being terrified showed her the kind of lawyer she wanted to be, someone who fights for people who can't fight for themselves. Her support throughout this entire process had been crucial, and I realized I might want to follow a similar career path helping expose injustice, maybe as an investigative journalist like Aurelia, or a federal agent like Christensen. 6 months after Lowbray's arrest, the criminal trial finally began, and Sophia and I both had to testify about what we witnessed and experienced. Walking into that courtroom was terrifying, and I could barely breathe when I saw Lowbray sitting at the defendant's table in a suit, but he looked smaller and less powerful than he used to, and I realized he couldn't hurt us anymore. Sophia testified first and spoke clearly about overhearing his phone call and the threats he made against her family, and I testified about the evidence I found and how he tried to intimidate me. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding him guilty on all counts, including embezzlement, money laundering, witness intimidation, and abuse of authority. The judge sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay back everything he stole, and when the bailiff led him away in handcuffs, I felt this huge weight lift that I didn't even know I was carrying. The school community held a special assembly a few weeks later to acknowledge what happened and honor the courage it took for students to come forward against someone in authority. The new principal publicly thanked Sophia, Haley, and me for our bravery, and announced that the recovered funds would be used to improve school programs and provide scholarships for students who were affected by the budget cuts Lowbray's theft caused. It felt surreal to be recognized as heroes when we were just trying to do the right thing, and some kids still whispered about us in the hallways, but most people seem to understand now what we went through. Sophia and I became incredibly close friends through everything we survived together, and we spent hours talking about our plans for the future. She decided she wanted to study psychology to help other trauma survivors, and she was already volunteering with a crisis hotline on weekends. She told me that having someone believe her and fight alongside her literally saved her life, and that she wanted to be that person for others who felt alone and powerless. Watching her transform from broken to strong had been the most meaningful part of this entire experience, more than the trial or the recognition or anything else. As junior year ended and we looked toward senior year, I thought about how different everything was from that September morning when Sophia walked back into school looking destroyed. She was thriving now, planning for college, laughing with friends, and no longer carrying the crushing weight of Lowbray's threats. I learned that speaking up against injustice was terrifying but necessary, and that even teenagers had the power to take down corrupt systems when we refused to stay silent. We were both genuinely excited about the future, knowing we were stronger and braver than we ever imagined we could be, and ready to face whatever came next together.